Good evening. Oh, hello and welcome. Not quite such a warm evening as yesterday, but a very warm welcome to our wonderful parish church here in Whittlesford. And it's a joy to see you in person. And for those online, we welcome you too who are watching live on the live stream. I am so excited not only that we are celebrating 1,000 years of our church and our community, but that we are having this History Week to kind of help get focus and to think back. I find it hard to think 50, 100 years, but 1,000 years of history. And it's wonderful to have our exhibition. We had a fantastic lecture last night, and I'm really excited to learn lots of new things so that when people ask me all these questions, I'll be able to answer about the Sheela Na Gig. My husband's told me I've got to be quick and not go on, so I will stop and hand over to him. But thank you for coming.
Great, thank you, Vicar. So, John, I just want to introduce you and thank you for coming. I think the first thing I'm going to do is to say that John Harding has travelled for 5 hours to be here. I mean, that shows commitment. So he's come from Blandford Forum in Dorset, and he spent 2 hours on the M25. So I'm really sorry. So I hope you feel a warm welcome to Whittlesford, to the village. We're putting you up overnight, and he's experiencing the hospitality of Mr. Tickell tonight. So we hope that goes well. So John tells me that he's a software developer by trade. As someone in the healthcare industry, I was interested to hear that he developed the whole of the radiology software structure for Wales, which is no small feat. And he has a minor part-time hobby, which has led him to write the definitive article in the Encyclopedia Britannica on Sheela Na Gigs. Sheela Na Gigs. Okay, so when we were planning this History Week, John, we wanted to do some stuff on the church, but what we didn't want is to do a kind of boring thing of the church was built here and then that happened and then that happened. We wanted to pick out a couple of things that fascinate us. So we did graffiti yesterday, but I don't think there's any doubt that the thing that intrigues us or puzzles us or even worries us, can I say that, is why on earth we have that thing on the wall of our church. And it's a bit embarrassing stroke exciting, you know, to hear why it's there, fascinating. And you did warn me that you're going to use adult terms tonight, and we understand why, because it's hard not to. So we did put a health warning on the advertising here. So everyone here is made of stern stuff, John. So, I mean, we've got Wendy here, so, you know, everything goes, it's fine. So you know, we're not going to be embarrassed or anything like that, but we're really intrigued. And the other thing that you said to me is that you were worried that we'd be some wacky group who would entertain all sorts of fantastical ideas. Well, we've got Kitty here. I mean, just look at her. This is, you cannot get more sensible, rational, down to earth than here. So we're really intrigued to hear what an expert has to say about our Sheela Na Gig. Now, you've told me you're going to give a general discussion about Sheela Na Gigs first, and then you're going to tell us about our one in particular. So I'm really grateful. Now, what I'm going to do, this isn't inappropriate. I'm just going to turn your mute button off. So I think you should be live now. So John, we're really grateful that you've come. We're really grateful you've travelled 5 hours. I'm sorry for that, but I hope this is good, that you feel welcomed here and appreciated here. Thank you, John.
Right, can everybody hear me? That sounded good. That's got a really quiet voice. Right, a bit about me at the beginning. My name is John Harding. I'm originally from South Wales, but I live in Dorset now, hence the 5-hour journey. I've been researching Sheela Na Gigs since 1998. I've contributed to a number of books on the subject, but I've not actually written any books myself yet. Divine Hag of the Christian Celts, Sheela Na Gig Unraveling in the Enigma, Most of the Wikipedia article on Sheela Na Gigs is written by me, and they did the start-off article for Encyclopedia Britannica. I've got a photo library of figures, and I counted them just before I came here, and apparently about 11,000 photographs. That's a lot. I didn't know I had that many. I got interested in the figures when I was in Hampton. I used to go on day trips to Shropshire.
On the chairs and put that there. Let's put it on the chair then. And you can sit on that chair.
Butting in, okay. Okay. Right. Tell her to quiet, please. Okay. Right.
Thanks,
Right. I will try and do this. My wife told me to do this as well. Right. I got interested in the figures after I saw the figure at Church Stretton. It's a very odd figure. It's just completely out of place. Looked it up on the internet. There wasn't much information on the internet about them. So I decided to put some web pages up, and it sort of grew from there. It's led me to some very odd places. I ended up having email conversations with bishops. I've unintentionally expanded the knowledge of Anglo-Dutch wars in the 1600s because of Sheela Na Gigs. Story around that. Yeah, it's just so odd, and arranging art deals for famous artists. There we go. That's very doing. Anyway, let's get on to the actual subject now. Right, first off, a quiz. First off, I'll ask everybody, who's seen a Sheela Na Gig other than the one here?
Second.
Who's seen a Sheela Na Gig other than the one here? Yeah. Which one have you seen? Oh, right, okay. All over the place then, okay. Right. Which of these is a Sheela Na Gig? If you said the one at the end, yeah, that's correct. The fact of the matter is, though, all of the other figures have been called Sheela Na Gigs as well. I'll go on to more about the term, but it's become a catch-all term for anything unusual on a church, basically. Right, let's go on to the next one. Right, I'm going to define what a Sheela is. A female figure of a naked woman with emphasized sexual organs, either exaggerated by size or by gesture. Male and monstrous figures have no name, because you get male exhibitionists as well. They're part of a tradition of exhibitionist figures in medieval art. This one is, what is a typical Sheela Na Gig? Now, there isn't one, because every time you try and pin one down, they have these features, they have these, it's this. It wriggles away, basically. So, this one, there's a chap called Jorgen Andersen who wrote a book called The Witch on the Wall, and it was called after this figure in Ireland. So this was in, I believe this was in Fethard. Yes, that's it, yeah. This one's I would say typical Irish Sheela Na Gig, but you see more of them in Ireland. It's grimacing. It's not pretty. No, yours is quite cheerful, actually, so but this one isn't. It's got ribs. The stance is typical, but it's not a pretty thing, I think you agree, yeah? Then we go on to another Irish figure. This is the original Sheela Na Gig. People have got local names for figures, and one of them is Sheela Na Gig, and this is one of the original ones that were Sheela Na Gig. This is actually a replica. It was stolen in 1990, and a local chap called James O'Connor produced a replica, and he did a very good job of it. He was promptly arrested. I had a chat with him on the phone in Ireland, and there's a whole movie there because he was talking to. He was obviously free, so he wasn't arrested, didn't go anywhere. But he was interviewed by Interpol, all this sort of thing. And anyway, but this is now what's on display in Ireland, and it's a replica, maybe. Now, this one is an English one. This is in Easthorpe. This is kept in Colchester Museum. It was actually from Easthorpe Church. They took it away. It's the only figure that's known. It's got an inscription on it. It's got a Louis on the side. There's been much talked about this. It could be part of Alleluia. It could be Saint Eloi. It's also part of the conjugation of the Latin verb meaning to wash away. So we get into, just bear that in mind when we get into what they mean, the figures mean. Now, the next figure, this is a fairly monstrous Sheela Na Gig. It's not pretty at all. As you can see that. This one, quite frankly, gives me the heebies. This one's kept in. And we were having a conducted tour, I think, one arranged by a chap that knew the museum. And we got talking, one of the group talking to a lady who was sitting next to it, and she described it as very peaceful and calming. How I don't know, but there we go. Now you may recognize the next one. Ta-da! Right. It's one of the largest Sheela Na Gigs. Well, it seems to be. I'd love to know exactly how big it is, to be honest with you, because, but it's actually a fairly well carved version as well. The Sheela Na Gig itself is better carved than the male figure. Somebody asked me earlier, do you get sort of pairs? Is this the only pair figure? No, they're not common, but there are other ones. It's unusual. Well, I just saw the other figures. The first one had skeleton, ribs. So this one's quite plump. Again, trying to nail down what a Sheela Na Gig is. It's a bit hard. Now the next one is another English Sheela Na Gig. This is in Oaksey in Wiltshire. Elspeth Huxley lived in the village, and she wrote The Flame Trees of Thika, or Tika, yeah. She also wrote a book about village life in Oaksey, and called Gallipot Eyes, and she described this figure as male. Don't know why. It's one of these midgets, but there is. You find this a lot of the time. Is that obviously female figures will be described as male. Don't know why. This is the one that got me started off. This is a standing Sheela in Church Stretton in Shropshire. This is. It's above a door, and somebody's tried to make it a little less exhibitionist by putting a stone in the vulva. It's got very strange, not seen any legs other than legs like this on any other sculpture. It's quite fat, and they might actually have hooves on the bottom. But yeah, it's just obviously not part of the building as well, because the current building is completely different. Now, we're talking about Sheela Na Gigs. What does the name mean? Now, as somebody on Ireland here, it's an Irish name, and it says for the Kiltenane figure. It was first published in 1840 in the Ordnance Survey of Ireland, right into the cheerful, dancey figure we saw earlier. It becomes a generic figure for these sculptures at that time. It's pseudo-Irish. The earliest recorded name for a figure is actually in the Isle of Wight. It's called the Idol. That was in 1781. There's been a lot written about the Sheela Na Gig name. And a lot of it is, it's very contentious. Sheela, it's an Irish form of a Norman name, either Cecile or Cecily. It also gets associated with Julian as well for some reason. Na is the only demonstrably Irish part of the name. I'm happy to be corrected on this if you speak Irish. So. Gig is the part that is the contentious part. Again, there's a lot written about it. It says some people say it's gee, but it does appear in a dictionary of English slang, not Irish slang. In a dictionary of thieves' cant. And if you look at the bottom part there we go. Gig, a nose, also a woman's privities. a fit of the gig, or a young wanton lass. And that sort of fits quite with the sexual nature of the carvings. That's an English piece of slang. Now, you need to bear in mind as well that when the chap who was recording this, because I believe he wasn't an Irish speaker, but somebody said, "Oh, that's Sheela Na Gig." So we hope it's Sheela Na Gig. There is some evidence that it is actually Sheela Na Gig because there was a HMS Sheela Na Gig in the Royal Navy in 1780. And they said it's an Irish female sprite. So there's obviously been talked about there. So, it's also mentioned in the names of various tombs. There's an author, there's a researcher called Barbara Freitag who does an excellent job of researching the name in Sheela Na Gigs Unraveling the Enigma. Now, if you've got Kindle, she's made it free on Amazon, and you can just download a copy for free. I think the book costs about 200 quid. So but it's a very good book, and if you read it for free, it's a very good introduction to Sheela Na Gigs, basically. Right, this is the idol. We'll go on the name again. This is the Saxon idol, or the idol at Binstead in the Isle of Wight. This is actually two figures. We have hang on. Oh, what there? Oh, hang on. It's going wrong. Right. Okay. This was mentioned in 1781, The History of the Wight by R. Worsley, and was mentioned again in a later book called A New and Correct, Much Improved History of the Wight in 1795. So this is the oldest one. The idol is also a name that is applied to one in Ireland in Lusk.
I'm going to try putting this here, John, see if that
helps. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay or not? I'll start shouting if you need me to. Huh?
Keep shouting.
Yeah, okay. Right, I shall talk like this from now on. Okay. Can't keep it up. Right. There are many names for Sheela Na Gigs. Oh, sorry, I was going to tell you this, sorry. Here, it's actually two figures. This is the actual Sheela Na Gig, which has got the bent knees, the sort of, you can tell it is a very worn figure. One of the other things is it's got these funny ears, like sort of jug ears. You see these on some of the figures as well. That is actually a beast head. It's like a cow or a bridal sort of beast head. You also see these in Romanesque sculpture, which we'll get onto in a minute, which these are part of. These are the different names for Sheela Na Gigs. I won't go through them all, but we've got the idol, the Saxon idol, Julia the Giddy, or Julia the Giddy, Julia the Giddy d'Angleterre, English, St. Gobnut, the Witch's Stone, the Nun on the Potty. The Nun on the Potty is actually an English one. It's in, where is it now? Romsey, that's it. It's something that the local school children call the sculpture, which is a fairly crude female figure with her legs splayed apart. She's got a crow's ear, and she's got this little bowl underneath her, so it's a Nun on the Potty. So, the Water God is another one. Freya is one up in the north of England. You've also got these different spellings of Sheela Na Gig and all that sort of thing. So it's a very sort of fluid sort of thing, the name itself. Right, where can you find Sheela Na Gigs? If you ask most people who are familiar with them, the answer will be Ireland. Sorry, the only Irish person you know. While it's true there are lots in Ireland, it's also true you can find them all over Europe. Jorgen Andersen, who was the chap who did the Witch on the Wall book, suggested a continental source for the figures, and this is further backed up by Anthony Weir in a book called Images of Lust. If you want to read 3 books on Sheela Na Gigs, which will tell you what they are, it's The Witch on the Wall, which if you can get a copy, it'll cost you about 200 quid, because it's very restricted. Sheela Na Gigs Unraveling the Enigma by Barbara Freitag, which is now free, and Images of Lust, which is you can usually find sort of online somewhere. But all 3 of them are very good books. Right, so this is the distribution of Sheela Na Gigs in Ireland. As you can see, there's quite a lot. Dr. Eamon Kelly of the National Museum in Ireland, you often see him on, if there's anything to do with Irish archaeology, you usually see him on Discovery and all that sort of thing. He hasn't got many teeth, but keeps his mouth shut. This is from Gabriel Cannon's site. If you want, again, this is on the internet. It's Ireland's Sheela Na Gigs, and that's a very good resource if you want to find out more about them as well, about Irish Sheela Na Gigs. What Dr. Eamon Kelly said about these figures is that they were in areas where there was Norman influence. Well, we come back to Normans. We've got a Norman name, and now we're saying, well, they're actually where the Normans invaded Ireland when the Normans invaded Ireland. This is from my website. This is for the British Sheela Na Gigs. Not only Sheela Na Gigs on here, you've got figures which have been said to be Sheela Na Gigs which aren't. You've got monstrous figures, you've got figures, male figures. Like I said, I'm from South Wales, and me and my compadre Keith Jones, who is no longer with us, we get sort of, you see there's a lot around the M4 basically. So that's because of us basically. But you see one in Jersey as well, it's a fairly new one. Right, how old is Sheela Na Gigs? This pertains to your figure as well, by the way. It's a contentious subject. For the three you've got here, I'm not desperately convinced that this figure is a Sheela Na Gig. It's another Irish one, but it's the one that's on the stone on Tara. That's probably the most sort of Sheela Na Gig-like image I've ever seen of it. This one is the famous one, which is from Kilpeck. That is from the 12th century. This one is one that was found only a few years ago in Ashbourne in Derbyshire. And it could be a fake or it could be the real thing. I really don't know. But it's very, very strange, sort of like skull-like head, which you could relate back to the Irish figure. It's fairly, so some of them are quite monstrous, right, so in Ireland, there's a chap called Jerry Dempsey who's doing some very good work on Sheela Na Gigs. And he's discovered that basically the reason that there are more Sheela Na Gigs in Ireland is because they just keep on making them. The ones in this country tend to end at the 12th century. At the end of the 12th century, they stop. Male figures go on. Female figures stop for whatever reason. In Ireland, they just keep on being made. This is from Jerry Dempsey's. Again, it's fairly recent sort of thing. But Sheela Na Gigs in this country are almost exclusively from the 12th century. Yours is from the 12th century, which I'll go into in a bit. They're also part of a tradition of exhibitionism in medieval art. This is Adam and Eve on the Bayeux Tapestry. So again, you can see Adam's quite excited and Eve looks a little nonplussed. There is another figure on the Bayeux Tapestry, which is another male figure, which is letting it all hang out. This is the Massa Maritima Venus tree painting. It's a little difficult to see on this, but those are not fruit. They're all penises, complete with testicles as well. You've got people arguing about them underneath. This is a public piece of sculpture. It was found in a fountain, a public fountain in Italy. There's another, I couldn't find a photograph on it, unfortunately, but there's a 12th century fountain, and it's made of iron, which is weird. But it's men peeing, basically. But that's another thing, sort of, never be able to find anything of it. If you go on to, so that's the 12th, 13th century. Sorry, that's me. Ah, dear. Right, and now we go into a little bit later now. You've had your graffiti one, and you've got the Sheela Na Gig one. The next one you want to do is pilgrim badges, because you get them like this. Everybody quite happy what that is? It's an image of a pilgrim depicted as a vulva, with possibly a penis hat on top, penis staff. There are other ones which has a vulva with a crown on, with a whip and a crossbow, riding a horse. Other ones have people peeing into their hoods, but it goes on into the 15th century, because we get lots of male figures on churches in the 15th century. Right, we can't talk about Shelias though without mentioning Romanesque art. Now this is where you have a piece of Romanesque art, or pieces of Romanesque art on this church. They're the voussoirs in the wall and the Sheela Na Gig. Right, it means Romanesque, this is like a layman's explanation, so some of you may know it. Romanesque means in the style of the Romans. It's from the 12th century, sort of, in this country, it comes over in the 12th century when the Normans invade, and it explodes in the 12th century. It's the decorated corbels. You've got chevron decoration, which you've got outside. You've got the sort of zigzag stuff. And it's a very, it is both highly original and highly repetitive. You'll see, if you look at Romanesque churches, you'll get images which you see on other Romanesque churches. There's a strange one with a chap at head of a man which has combed hair, and that's on Kilpeck Church on this church, and there's almost the exact same figure in Norway, which is strange. Romanesque, right? Now I think you agree that exhibitionist figures, be they male, female, they're a strange thing to find on a church, but Romanesque sculpture is strange. It was actually called strange when it was being carved. So these were fantastical sort of images when they were being carved. You've got Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, and he writes a letter to one of his monks. He's complaining about why we've got all this fantastical sculpture. What does it mean? This is nothing to do with God. This is when it was actually being carved. I've got a big thing around, I won't read it out. But, for instance, right, this is in Stoke-sub-Hamden in, I think it's Dorset. Anybody have a guess what that is? No, neither have I. This one is in a Wedi church in South Wales. So we've got a head on a horse or a donkey having its tail bitten by a tumbling bear. That's obviously the story of the head on the donkey. Now this one is actually a little bit more explainable. This is on Kilpeck Church. If you get a chance to get into Hereford and go to Kilpeck Church, go and see it, because it's a really wonderful thing. Church, seriously, it's almost like a perfectly preserved Norman church. That's thought to be an ibex. One of the things that they took their inspiration from were medieval bestiaries, and the ibex was, and they weren't like lists of animals like we get today. They were lists of animals with Christian symbolism attached to them. And one of the features of the ibex is because he's got very large curved horns. And obviously the chap didn't know what an ibex looked like when he carved this, but they would fall from great heights but survive because they landed on their horns. So it's a falling ibex, possibly. So it was carved upside down deliberately, possibly. A lot of Romanesque sculpture is quite cartoonish. Everybody go, oh. This actually inspired a cartoon. I don't know if probably the wrong audience for this, but there's a computer game called Sam and Max that was going back a few years, which was a dog and a hare rabbit, and they were police for hire. But one of his fans sent this to the chap that made it. He now works for Pixar, the chap who did it. And he did a web comic which has these bursting out of the ground in Kilpeck Church. Life imitating art sort of thing. We've seen this before, but this is the most famous of all the Sheelas. Now, this is a English Sheela. It's on the borders. It's actually, it's in the Welsh borders. And then you've got, historically, we have Wales, who is Wales. And then we've got England, who's ruled by William the Conqueror. And then you've got this thin, well, not so thin line up the border with Wales, which is the Welsh Marches. And they are neither Wales nor England. And they had their own customs. You've got the customs of the march. Which is where a lot of Sheelas are, actually. This one is. This one's quite cheerful as well. So, I had some chap on the internet contact me. He said, "Oh yeah, there's these Irish Sheela Na Gig in Kilpack." I said, "No, it's England. Sorry." But even if you go to Ireland, this is the Fairies pub. And they use the Sheela Na Gig, and they use an English Sheela Na Gig. I don't know why. Since I don't understand, you've got more Sheela Na Gigs in Ireland than you can shake a stick at. But they pinch this one. This is the poster girl for Sheela Na Gigs, basically. Another Irish thing. There at the bottom, Kilpack again. We've also got other figures on Kilpack. It's a very good church for figures, basically. They're wrestling, possibly. And you have a chap playing the fiddle. There is a story that in Victorian times, the wife of one of the incumbent vicars decided that she didn't like some of the sculptures. Now, the Sheela survived. You can see there's actually some where the corbels on the church have been missing now. And the story goes that basically she ordered it to be chopped down, taken off the wall. And there's a modern day occurrence of this that happened a few years back there in southern England with one of the parishioners in the church who had this fairly inoffensive figure, decided, well, they think it was one of the parishioners, went into the church late at night, chopped it off the wall, completely destroyed it. So we now have less one figure because of that. Somebody took an objection to it. It's more of the Kilpack Corbel table. There's actually a bit of a story there, but if you get a chance to go, this is also an example of the sculptors travelling. So the Kilpack Sheela Na Gig, along with the rest of it, comes from the Herefordshire School of Sculpture. And you can go up and down the marches, you can find their work, you can go drift into Wales a bit and into England a bit as well. But this one is quite far away in Old Sarum Cathedral. Now it's thought that the chap who did the Sheela also did this. Right, we'll go on to folklore. Are there any stories about the Sheela Na Gig here? Do you have any stories about it at all?
Lots of stories.
Lots of stories. I'll have to find out about them later. One of attached to the two of the figures, we have the Holgate figure. The photograph doesn't do it justice. That figure is, if you see it up close, it is a visceral figure. No two ways about it. This is in Buckland. And they're both said to be the last man hanged on Hang Hill or wherever they hang people. Why that? It's strangely attached to the two of them as well. This one, now apparently, the story goes is that this Sheela Na Gig is impossible to photograph. People have tried it, it just didn't work. I hadn't read that before I got there, so I didn't know, so I managed to get a photograph of it. This has a number of stories associated with it. The water god is supposed to come from a bridge. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's set into the wall and it seems to be part of the church. So it's far too big to sort of get there. One of the things that was, four of us went around the church trying to find this thing, bearing in mind it's about 2 foot tall and right next to the front door. And we just about to leave and we found it. So it took us about an hour to find it. So it's kind of perhaps something to the impossible to photograph. Just can you go off on a side thing here? In the church in Croft-on-Tees, one of the vicars was the father of Lewis Carroll. And Lewis Carroll, as a young boy, would have been around the church. And there's this 15th century cat sculpture. There's a chap standing on top of it. But if you lie underneath it, like a small boy might do, you get a cat head, and you get the smile, just the smile. This was one of the potential sort of Cheshire cats sort of thing. Right, theories. Theories, an ancient goddess. This is one of the pet theories on the internet, is that they're obviously part of the goddess, goddesses, and obviously sort of they've gone down through the centuries and they've been put to the churches because it's pagan people putting them up there. No real evidence to support that, unfortunately. It's usually a Celtic goddess. Now, the Celtic part was back to, you find them in Ireland, there's lots in Ireland. Okay, there's other Celtic parts. There's Brittany, none that I know of. Scotland, a few. Wales, 2 possibly. There's possibly one in Cornwall as well. I looked into actual sort of Celtic sculpture, which this is one of. This is in Caerwent. And they follow Roman rules, basically. You have the Tres Matres from Cirencester, and they're all seated and they all have images of plenty, sort of food, babies and all that sort of thing, which don't really match with the Sheela Na Gigs. They also get associated with prehistoric figures, this is Mesolithic figures from Serbia. Well, possibly looks a bit like a Sheela Na Gig, but it's too much time. There is possibly an historic precursor to Sheela Na Gigs, but it comes from Greece, of all places. Bobo figurines. Now, Bobo figurines are mass-produced figurines which came over the Romans. They're made from terracotta, and they show a figure called Bobo from the myth of Demeter. And the story goes that Demeter had lost her daughter because she was in Hades, and she was a bit depressed. So Bobo, being a naughty girl, decides to cheer her up, so he gives her a drink, and she lifts her skirts, showing her bits, basically. And these figures were to do with fecundity and all that sort of thing. You can find these figures in Western Europe because they were so plentiful. They possibly are a precursor to Sheela Na Gigs. This one doesn't really look like a Sheela Na Gigs. The headdress is a feature of these figures. This is one that was actually found in France, a French Bobo. It's the one at the top there. But they do start to morph a bit. This is an auction Bobo, which is meant to be from Egypt, but again with the Romans. And then we get this one, another auction one, soapstone Bobo, and you're getting more into what we know as Sheela Na Gigs. Right, fertility and birth. Particularly everybody's shared the fertility stories about these, yeah? They don't really fit in with the way the figures look. This figure, is quite plump, it's quite sort of, and it's obviously sexual as well. That might actually be about fertility. This one is allegedly. We've got this in Romsey. This is next to the nun on the potty. We actually know who carved this because he's very kindly signed it. And it's thought to be a replacement of a Romanesque corbel that was done in 1865. But it would have been sort of that ilk sort of thing. As you can see, it's giving birth. These figures are in Cervatos in Spain. Now we have a couple having sex, woman giving birth, and the obligatory goat. Don't know why. But there are actually birth figures within Romanesque sculpture, which means Sheela Na Gigs or something else. A warning against the sin of lust. Now this is actually what I think possibly this one means. These figures are on, Studland in Dorset. That one is a male figure on the right, which had his willy chopped off. That one is, believe it or not, a Sheela Na Gig, but it's very, very abstract. And that's thought to be a depiction of homosexuality. That's all in the same church. You also get the mouth of hell. There is a tradition, which is supported by evidence, that the people or the priests would use the figures to teach the illiterate. There's actually St. Hugh of Lincoln. There's a story of him, and he's conducting King John of Robin Hood fame around the cathedral, and he's saying, look at these hellish figures. If you don't mend your ways, you're going to end up with him. And King John, being King John, says, well, look, I'm with the angels, I'm a king, you know. But it's they did use it as a teaching tool. So they have these sort of figures to say, look, this is being sort of like, you know, if you don't behave, you're going to end up going to hell. This one is from Haverford West Priory. Now, the interesting thing about this figure, it may be exhibitionist, it's on sort of halfway there. It's definitely, I consider it to be a female figure. The only audience for this figure would have been monks or the clergy. So it might be a warning against for something to do with clerical celibacy, maybe. If you go on to the next slide, this is an example of combining motifs. So you've got the hell mouth, or the beast devouring, and you can't quite see it there, but that's a Sheela Na Gig underneath it. So it's holding a revolver open. Now, to go against this, these are on Exeter Cathedral. These are just over a foot square, but that big. These are actually fiberglass casts of them. That's the male one. Now, if these are meant to be teaching tools, that's where they are. They're essentially invisible. So you really can't see them. So these are obviously not teaching tools. So why? Next theory, protection against evil. It is a repeating motif in European folklore is that the devil cannot stand the sight of a woman's sex. And this is an example from the 1700s. Personally, I've heard it from Portugal, Norway, Italy. In Norway, the devil was a bear. The story was that the woman presents her vulva as a wound, and the devil is scared off because she bleeds and she doesn't die. Yeah. There's also a tradition of the sight of a woman's sex being to stop fights. There's a recorded in the Irish Times from the 1800s of this, but there was a blarney going on between two families, and one of the women raised her skirts and stopped it. And there's another story from Italy in Milan that it was being besieged in one of the very many, the wars they had, and a young girl, to stop they'd broken into the city, and a young girl went on the battlements and lifted her skirts, and all the fighting stopped. There's actually a statue there called the Porta-Tossa figure. You can see her cutting her pubic hair with a pair of scissors. Next one is in Oxford. That might actually be a good example of a protection figure, because it was originally on the top of this tower, and one of the northern gates to Oxford was actually to form part of the northern gates. This is one in Ireland. So this is where this has no genitals. It's regarded as a Sheela Na Gig, but it doesn't really fit the sort of thing. But it's widely regarded as a Sheela Na Gig. It fits. It's got the ribs. It's got the jugulars. It's got the breasts. Now, I'm going to switch now to another presentation, which will be about your figure. I'm going to put it in place. Right. Wheels for church. Right, so this is just a short presentation, so it's nearly over. So you can. This is part of a Romanesque incarnation of this church. Do you have any evidence for that at all? No? Anybody? I'll ask you later, never mind. You've got sort of evidence for it, is you've got these voussoirs, with the chevron voussoirs, they're being Romanesque. Voussoir is actually part of, see these stones in the arch? It's the individual stones that make up an arch. And sometimes you get the corbels go back quite a way as well. So there's an arch or a doorway. So. Now we go into the actual figure. This is another Romanesque feature. In fact, there's the CRSBI site takes this as proof that there was a 12th century, basically. Sheela Na Gigs in academia tend to be sort of they're a 12th century thing. The figure seems to be an example of the warning against lust theory. He says it's quite plump. There's a theory that this carving may be part of a triangular tympanum. I hope I'm saying that word right. This is the top part of a Romanesque door, which is usually filled in a semicircle, except this one's a triangular one. He also has the male figure. I don't know of any other figures which are so explicitly sexual. This one is explicitly sexual, with the male figure there. Now, somebody asked me earlier, is this the only one with a male? Nope. This is the same, but it's very similar to this figure here as well. This is in Abson, it's near between Bath and Bristol. It's similar to the one in Whittlesford because it's crouching down and you've got this sort of elongated thing. Unfortunately, this is just a single piece of sculpture from a previous incarnation of the church it's on. Maybe a later version. Now, going back to this one, if you notice that there's a slant at the top of the carving. Yeah. Now, the CRSBI think that this was actually once part of a triangular tympanum. Romanesque tympanums are usually simply semicircles. This is a triangular one. And they gave Tarrant Rushton in Dorset, which is fortunately about 4 miles away from where I live, as an example of another one. So I can give you, there we go. Now what you got is you have a central figure. It's usually flanked by two other figures, usually, though not always. In this we've got Jesus on the side there, Christ in Majesty. And there's a figure, a male figure on that side. There's an example of the flanking figures, basically. This is in Woolston. You've got a male figure on one side, exhibitionist, well-worn exhibitionist in the middle, and there's another figure entangled in vegetation on the other side. Now, pairs of figures, they're also quite common. This is in devises. This is not really as obvious when you come and see it because you have to go right under the figure to see the relevant bits. You literally got to be sort of standing next to the wall looking up. What we've got here is a female figure, and the figure on the right seems to be masturbating, which is another. You also see that in other carvings. Now the next few slides are all from the same church. Possibly a male and female exhibitionist with something joining the mouth. On the same church, very worn figures, which might be damaged exhibitionists. Male exhibitionist, male musicians pair. It's again to do with sin. Music apparently is sinful as well. Got the damaged pair on the side. Not quite sure about those. Now, if we get a bit nearer, this is in Moulton, which is not quite near here, but it's a few miles away. You have with this pair, you've got a Sheela Na Gig, possibly been damaged, and we have this figure with the ears up, the all-round position has been described as. So that may be another pair. Right, this is in Royston, which is up the road. Familiar with it? Yeah. This is the Sheela Na Gig in the chalk pit there. As far as I'm aware, this is part of the Diocese of Ely. Yeah. Do you know if that was in medieval times as well? No? Yeah, it was. Right, okay. This is the only Sheela Na Gig I've ever found. Only the cathedral. Don't know if you can see, it's a bit dark. This is basically, we had a number of people going to see this. Said, oh, right, you've got to go into the bishop's garden to be able to see this figure, and you've got to get permission. Oh, okay. So I went there one day, just scanning the figures, and oh, there it is. And I was on a piece of grass. It doesn't really look like the bishop's garden, because it's like this public area. So I took some photographs of it, and went back and got chatting with the people on the internet. And it turns out people didn't realise, but they got two Sheela Na Gigs there. So you've got, in a church that's connected with this church, Sheela Na Gig figures. This is the other one, which is in the bishop's garden. Now, these figures, they thought to be done by French sculptors. So this may have been carved locally, but it may have been done by French sculptors because you're that near France. Now the next one is in St. Ives, which are all fairly near here. Now take a good look, because that's the only time you'll ever see this. It's now gone. It's disappeared. Anybody called Jude here? Surname? Right, oh, damn, okay. This was owned by a Mr. Jude in St. Ives, who unfortunately died, and his estate was given to the relatives and stuff, and this just then vanished, so it's now lost. I know that the museum would love to have it there, but this is one of the last remaining photographs of it, which unfortunately Weir gave to me. So, just to sum up about what this is. It's very likely, if not incredibly likely, to be carved in the 12th century. It fits in with the warning against lust, the educational thing. And it's a pity that there's not more of the Romanesque incarnation of the church surviving. Where there's one Sheela, there may be others, as we've seen. So you've got Royston nearby and all that sort of thing. There may be other figures to discover in the area as well. It may have been carved by French masons, but sorry, I must have lost the plot now. This is basically it's 12th century, and it's likely to be carved by French masons, and there are other ones around it. If you want to go and find more, please do. And if you do, could you tell me, please? Right, that's it. I'm afraid you can all join the cup.
John, thank you very much. That was a tour de force. And I think we can be definite that we brought an expert here to tell us about our Sheela. So, 12th century, maybe French sculptors. Yeah. And a warning against lust. So, in terms of it's on the outside of our church. So are they all on the outside or some on the inside? Right. And in the warning theory, shouldn't there be warnings against greed? And there are they?
There are figures up in Derbyshire, we've got a figure for almost the letter D from the return. That's actually a first string. It's a man that going to hell. Trying to take the money that
Okay.
So that really you get into the legislation.
Okay. So we should be taking our children out. Anna's from the school here. We should pointing out and say, "Don't do that." Yeah, right. Will that work, Anna? Any questions for John? Any thoughts? Yeah, Anna. Yeah, Annie, ask the question on the microphone. Just
sorry.
Oh, for John.
These are very expensive pieces of carving. One of the things I should have mentioned probably is that these come over with the Normans, and they do a lot of killing, right? So they're wiping out all the Saxon lords and all that sort of thing. And there's this guilt that comes afterwards. It's usually with the children and the grandchildren of the people that come over. And they start building churches almost immediately afterwards. So you get like this influx of churches. One of the things, that's one of the things I didn't mention actually, is that they think that these came up via the pilgrim route from Santiago de Compostela, because you get a lot of them in Spain, a lot of them in France as well, and they come into this country with the Normans that way. So it's not a case of a quick doodle. Somebody's doing these deliberately, and they cost money, put it that way. You know, they're expensive.
Someone has said, witness that you need a warning against lust.
Well, this is the bit where St. Bernard of Clairvaux comes into it, and he says that it's obviously not the religious people who are commissioning them, because he's just sort of like, go and carve me something. But there seems to be the carvers have a lot of leeway this way. So,
Yes, please.
well,
In our library and always in the knowing of is teaching celebration of unity.
yeah. Yeah. Ah, okay. Mm. Mm.
But one of the things that he talked about was probably because they were all at the end of the church, that there was a connection within the church.
Yeah.
That they wanted to marry the traditions together.
Right. Indeed. Different type, yeah.
For the purposes of the internet, I'm going to repeat the question. So the idea, John, is that these are a residue from the Celtic Church as a positive way of trying to marry the, I guess, the Latin Christian Church and the Celtic tradition. So what do you think of that?
Right. Sheela Na Gigs mean something different in Ireland. Oops, sorry. Yeah. They mean something different in Ireland, and I think that's why they continue for so long. The evidence points to them coming over with not pre-existing the Normans. So they sort of coming over in there. And they said, Jorgen Anderson, who wrote the original book, he sort of said, he actually lived in Ireland and he loved it to be Irish, but he said, no, they're really continental, sort of thing. Yeah, yeah.
Bratislava.
Okay. All right. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, yeah, like, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. There are figures in India which are Sheela like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely, yeah.
Who'd have thought we'd have two Sheela? Can I call you nerds? Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, yeah.
Also, it was the early summer, there was the Lewis and Martin's and this look at the sheep, look at the birds, such
Yeah, this will do nicely. Yeah. Yeah. So, a warning against lust or a boost for local estate agents?
Yes, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Terrific. Yes, Anne.
Do you
mind repeating the question?
Yeah. Would this carving be made for where it is now, or was it reused? I believe it's reused. That's the CRSBI, there's the corpus of Romanesque sculpture in the British Isles, .ac.uk, it's an academic site. They think it's been reused from this triangular tympanum. So.
Is that wall?
No, this is a later church, much later church, yeah. Okay. Oh, complete. Okay. Right. Date's good for that. That's a good date. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good.
1,000 years ago. Oh dear. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll allow that.
The date's really good for that, so I think it's going to be good.
That's interesting, isn't it? So maybe it's introduced it.
Somebody else.
Hand up. Quick.
On the same speculation, do you have any ideas why the female figures stop at male figures? Is that something to do with a hierarchy of the church?
Don't know, to be honest with you, because, sorry, the question is why do the female figures stop suddenly after the 12th century? I don't know, basically, that it's different in Ireland. They continue in Ireland. But they tend to sort of peter out. You get like a few figures which just sort of bleed into the different century. Oh, yeah. We are. Yeah. No. Yeah, I can believe that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, it could be, yeah.
I'm going to call the formal proceedings to an end here. I think what we've done is we've learnt a lot. We've also uncovered a Sheela Na Gig expert in our community. So for those watching on the live stream, what we've learnt is that there's possibly an Irish connection with just a two-liner in an Irish book coming up with a date of 1190-something, 1199, referring to a consecration of a church in Whittlesfordia. So that does tie up, doesn't it? That sort of time for a Sheela Na Gigs. So I don't think I'm embarrassed about our Sheela Na Gig anymore, John. No, I'm really proud of it. Yeah, I'm proud of it. I like the idea that it's educational. So I think I'm going to stop the teenagers as they come past and say, let me show you something that will put you off. Well, anyway, let's. Yeah. So I think that's a nice idea, that.
There's one of the stories about the Oxford Sheela Na Gig. They showed the brides on their wedding day.
Oh, right. Okay, this could be before the wedding, yes. Olivia. This is the idea, yes. Showed the brides or the groom? Yeah. Right, yeah, okay, so there's all sorts of practical uses. So, John, I'm really sorry that you had such a terrible time getting here. But we're so grateful that you made the effort. And we're recording this. I'm imagining that when the timeline version 2 comes out, we're going to have our Sheela Na Gig firmly there. And he's taken a note because it's such a special part of our church. And it's really, it's so helpful that we have someone like you giving a sober account of the evidence. Very sober. Hopefully not for too much longer, John. Will you all just give your thanks for John Frism? Ants, would you mind bringing one of the church guides? Now, as a thank you, John. Now, these are available for retail for £250 each, but for you, it's free. For everyone else here, there's a massive discount tonight. It's just £3. I mean, how you could possibly not take £3.50? Apparently, the vicar's added her bonus. It's £3.50 tonight, reduced from £250. So please go to Ant and buy our new church guide, which the Whittlesford Society have produced and have donated to the church for the church's benefit, which is hugely generous. And I want to thank the Whittlesford Society who are here in the form of Meg and Rob and others for that. Do have a look at the exhibitions, our timeline. For those of you who are free tomorrow, we have a whole day of fantastic celebrations of the history of this church. 10 o'clock tour of the church by Squadron Leader Castles, who's there. I've been on those tours. They're fantastic. Please come to that. 12 o'clock, a lecture here on our Commonwealth war graves, which are extraordinary. We have pilots in our cemetery from the very dawn of flying all the way through to the 1960s. So please come to that. And then we have lunch. Olivia's going to make you lunch, which would be nice. And it's going to be sunny. It's going to be lovely weather. So please come along tomorrow to celebrate the history of this church. And then on Sunday is our final thing, 10 o'clock, the service in here will celebrate 1,000 years of worship in this place with examples of the sorts of liturgy that might have been heard and the sort of music that might have been heard over 1,000 years. So thanks very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, John, once again. And this evening is coming to an end.
Thank you.